start making, and we need to put together a proposal before we can make a request for state funding. And so, I don't know, that seems to undergird just about many other efforts we could do, is to actually put together a proposal so we could seek state funding for. I haven't looked recently to see the status of that program, or whether or not they've issued more specific guidelines of what they meant by qualified programs. But I want to draw attention to that, that if we get our act together, maybe there's some help.
And Deacon.
So in response to that, we did get information. Unfortunately, it wasn't till late this summer from the state that there was just under $1.2 million available to us, Whatcom County, with some portion of that dedicated to Bellingham proper. And to be quite honest, because of COVID, everything was delayed. So we certainly didn't know how much money would be available to us. So planning was difficult without that. And then, of course, we were caught up in the COVID response significantly. The other piece of this is that the Commerce said that any beds that we can increase in the community, any shelter capacity we can increase, must be operational by December of this year. And that we could go back to January in terms of efforts that had been in process, but in terms of paying for them with this money, they had to be operational by December. So this whole thing has been very, very challenging for us. We've obviously worked very closely with the city of Bellingham on this. We did issue an RFP, a request for proposal, and put out $400,000 as possible use over the next few years for which this grant is available. And we are awaiting responses here in the next week or so to see who may have some ideas for how to use the money available. Go ahead.
The deadline for response to the RFP is next week, or is that just your hoped for date?
No, is it the 15th, Anne?
It's the Thursday. We're pushing it back 2 days. So yeah, next week on Thursday. Yeah.
Are there any nibbles?
There are nibbles, but of course, now that it's out for RFP, we have been fairly remote, but we did reach out to a number of partners in advance to let them know it would be coming so they could think about that and what the eligible items are. I will say that because of the COVID pandemic, we needed to increase shelter capacity for the Lighthouse Mission, the general low barrier large shelter that we have in this community. And so the shelter grant will be able to pay for the lease on that building for about 3 years, which will be helpful. And so some of this grant can be used for that because we basically increased bed capacity by about 110 in our community, since we couldn't return to the drop-in center without dropping the available capacity to about 50 people. So the new facility can serve up to 200 every evening. But the only other requirement of this shelter grant is that whatever added capacity we add in terms of shelter beds, they must be operational not only by December, but 24/7 every day of the year.
So Anne, you said 3 years on the lease. How long is there any stipulation on the grant as to how long you can use it? I know you have to have your thing in place by December of this year, right. But how long can we use it?
I believe June 30th of 2023 is the end date of the grant.
I did talk to Commerce about this yesterday, and you don't have to have it running through that entire time. They want it there for a good length of time to make a difference, but if there's not funding available to run it through the whole time, they understand that.
It was just a terrible time for this all to happen. because Commerce couldn't get it out in time. We couldn't do the, ground level work we typically do in the spring because we had a pandemic on our hands. So, and again, Commerce just sent us the grant either this week or last week. I mean, the contract itself. So it's been a very discouraging and disappointing effort. We usually have it run much smoother, but it is what it is. So good news is we have money available to create some additional beds.
Michael,
Do we think that we can you can turn around the response to the RFP relatively quickly? I mean, I guess we have to, right? If whoever the recipient is needs to be operational by end of December, we need to let them know ASAP. I assume normally we don't turn around in a week or two, but are we going to try to turn around in a week or two?
We've already turned inside out a couple times on this and gotten exceptions to our timelines. And so we're going to continue to try that. Obviously, the county executive has been in support of that, as some members of our county council. So I think everyone understands the unusual time frame, and they're working with us to the extent possible.
and Ann, how does 1406 play into all this?
It's totally different. 1406 is permanent supportive housing or just permanent housing. And the shelter grant is simply shelter capacity.
Marcus.
Hi. So I'm Marcus D. I'm hearing about the RFP, and I've been hearing about the RFP lately. In regards to, I've actually made contact with an outfit called Pallet Shelters out of Everett, which I was really surprised they were just right out of Everett. They're manufactured in Everett. We go down and tour the facilities, and they're cranking out prefabricated walls and everything, a prefabricated structure that can be disassembled and reassembled up to 40 times. That can have an encampment on a lot for you overnight in a single day. And so I've been calling for tent encampments all summer long with the promise of going toward more permanent sheltering to protect them from the winter elements. And now here we are. I think it's too late for tent encampments, and I would hope we can consider possibly these people have the fellow I've been speaking with there, Patrick at Pallet Shelters, has he's already checked out our FRP and our RFP and is ready to move with us when we're ready to go. They have, I think they said 200 units available right now. And so there's a big need. As many of you have seen that I issued a letter in last week or a couple weeks ago, actually right after the meeting, to this group, and I hope you will all read that 7-page document. I know it's a long read, and it is about the cleanups and my observations there. I don't want to be the front man for that. I want to be a sheltering agent in Whatcom County and help be part of the solution. All I did was find some problems, and I've been asking for leadership all the way on this, guys. I know that Seth is listening today, and I'm hoping he can come forward with some of the solutions, because we had a discussion on September 1st where he verified the validity of all my statements in the letter. If you haven't read it, please read it. And thought that it was arguable and that we needed to do something, and he was going to try to act on that. So I'm asking for some action from all of my leaders. I know many of you have also received emails from me personally. So let's get tent encampments or these temporary encampments going promptly would be my call. It makes the most sense.
Yes, Ann.
Tent encampments are an eligible item for this grant. And this is the money we have. This is the money available to us. And I think we want to make sure we use every cent that the state has awarded us. And the only thing about tent encampments is just that they have to be operational 24/7. I can double check with Ann here, but I don't think there's any requirement that they stay in the same place. They just have to be, those extra capacity shelter beds have to be operational 365 days a year.
Yeah, and they just have to be, they have to fall within the city codes and, you know, the health standards, that kind of stuff. They have to be in compliance with all that. But other than that, they don't necessarily have to be in one space. They just have to have those assigned number of beds.
Marcus.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate while we're in that discussion that I really see the need for a more permanent structure. With experience in Winter Haven that we had behind City Hall, it was a smashing success as a program, but when the snows came, tents are a fail. And so it just feels like we need to be more ahead of the curve. We've got more coming too, so let's try to be ready. That's all.
Michael.
Marcus, unit cost for those was around 6,000. I can't remember.
The cost was $7 per unit retail. There's municipalities get a cut rate, nonprofits get a cut rate, and your contact at Pallet Shelter will be a man named Patrick. I can't remember. I got him written down here somewhere. And he's a wealth of information. He does this all the time. They want to sell you some units, and they've got them.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah, I'm very new to this, so there's a lot of things I don't understand. And I did read your full letter twice yesterday, Marcus, which I thought was very informative. The pallet system you're talking about, how does that withstand the extreme cold that we will be getting? I'm sorry, maybe you all know this, but I don't know this.
They have a heater circuit in them that's separate from another electrical circuit, so there will be heat inside them. If anybody knows about construction much, it's FRP, which is a fiberglass resin panel. It's very thin stuff, and then framing of aluminum with hard foam insulation between, and then RFP on the inside as well. So both sides, opening windows, 4 opening windows. And like I said, these dedicated circuits, including you can upgrade to the package to get a circuit for air conditioning if that's your want.
Thank you.
So do we have any other comments on the chart? I think this is an ongoing thing that we really need to hone in on so we can really dive into some of our action items. Yes, Lisa?
I had a question on the chart, and that was create an assessment map. I was wondering if that was created, and if there's also maybe a list, like a master list of who our community partners are, the folks that we're working with now, and if it's okay, you know, listening to Marcus and stuff, if we were to talk to other entities, maybe that might want to help us, that could get a hold of us to maybe get in on some of those RFPs and stuff that is available.
Yeah, I don't think we ever created that, to my recollection, but it's almost, you know, asset mapping is kind of what we need to do, I think, is what you're describing, and identifying our partners, identifying potential projects with those partners. And, you know, we got to get back to that where we're drilling down on specific issues and making things happen. So that's why we have a couple things on our agenda today that are specific items that we talked about last meeting that were important. So if there's no other discussion on the chart itself, I do encourage you, though, to look that over and mark it up and get it back to Kathy over the next week or so we can have even a more in-depth discussion on it next time. But the 2 items that we identified that we wanted to take on right away were safe parking and year-round sheltering for families. And I don't know who was taking on the parking role. I know the last time we met, we had planning from Bellingham. Planning Director Sepler gave us some updates. I don't know if you have any more on safe parking, Rick?
Yes. As you might recall, our council directed us to issue an RFP to look for an operator for safe parking. And we were poised to do that right about when COVID hit pretty strongly. We're picking that up now. There have been some inquiries, and we're trying to connect people with funding sources on that. And we should get the RFP out shortly.
Well, that's good to hear that's in work. Yeah, Marcus and then Jen.
I just have a quick question for Rick on that. I was confused in the last. Is this per the proposal that you put out, that the city put out on the parking proposal, up to and including we wouldn't do that? That would not be a 24-hour parking.
As you recall, we haven't put a proposal out. We haven't done the RFP yet. It's coming. When I presented it to you in November, we talked about doing an overnight facility. That would be a safe overnight facility that folks could go to, and would not be a permanent residential location. Clearly, that's we're willing to consider, different options on it. One of the more difficult things would be if it's more than an overnight facility, sites become somewhat more problematic. You can share a parking lot for overnight, and it has other uses, but if it's a more permanent location, it's going to be challenging. So at this point, we think we need to get it out there. There have been some folks who contacted us at your last meeting, and I did follow up with those people, and we're trying to see if we can get them connected with the right path to move forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Rick.
Jen Daly.
Yeah, we're at Northwest Street Services. We're concerned about safe camping locations, and I know that as winter comes up, camping is less and less desirable. But we have a lot of young people that don't have cars and don't have a place to access a safe parking lot. But we need a place to tell them that they can go. And so I just hope that we continue to talk about not just safe parking, but safe camping and how to have that in our community.
Yeah, Michael Lilliquist.
I was wondering if we could tag team that RFP that the county put out for those permanent shelters, and maybe the same people who might be interested in safe parking. I know there's one group who's looking more to do a tiny home model, but they could also expand and potentially do some safe parking component. So let's say you had room for 20 tiny homes, but you also had room for 12 overnight parkers. I want to make sure that if you're running a 24-hour facility, maybe it wouldn't be too difficult for you to add a parking component, a limited parking component. You would already have safety, addressed and ties into services. Maybe we're going back the same well over and over again, but it'd be kind of nice if we could not think about these two different ideas or any of these ideas as terribly separate from each other.
Marcus.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And furthermore, I know that in the past I've called for the idea that the government, be county and city, can bring together, ideally, come together on a property and bring upgrades and services to that property so that nonprofits and other partners can move in on it very cheaply and set up a camp or whatever, because the power drop is already there, because a septic is already hooked up there, or whatever facilities that can be given to the site, up to and including the shelters themselves, to allow a nonprofit to just walk in and help manage. So, and one of the things that had come up, of course, was the availability. I'd like to remind everybody that the Winter Haven site was right behind City Hall. That was as easy as moving vehicles around, and maybe that's something we can accelerate under an emergency. Same thing for the Safe Haven site where we were up at the Whatcom site up off of Texas Street. It's still an empty lot, other than an RV parked in the middle of it, but that's still an empty lot and has been the whole time. And so that's a usable site. And again, I'd like to echo that the Clean Green site is a much larger site, much like what Michael is talking about, so that you could feasibly have 2 or 3 nonprofits operating on there if you squeeze things in, including a parking component. And also, like he said, you can also share some resources, especially if that's government provided, so that it's not like one entity's paying the bill and doing it that way. Also, I'd like to invite all partners in here to consider building 3 little tiny homes on one of your lots, or anything that you're working. Be that the Opportunity Council has a big lot. If we'll help you support with whatever you want to come up with, but a few homes is a few people. Dual occupancy is 6 people if you get 3 homes up. So let's just think outside the box and get everybody into a box.
So Rick, do you have a timeline for when that RFP might be issued and when you want responses back?
No, not at hand right now. We've been talking about this last week. We're trying to pick that up.
Okay, maybe we'll just get an update from you in 2 weeks and see where we
Yeah,
are.
I'll be
Thank
there.
you. Thank you for your work. Anything else on safe parking that anybody can think of? Yes, Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I just want to point out EMS, I don't know if I call it a huge uptick, but they have noticed that there are more RVs where people can't move them out in the streets. We know this because we've had a few calls at those places, and you know, the conversation becomes, well, how can we move you somewhere, or can you get to a better location? And usually the RV is broken down or has multiple mechanicals, and so there's a number of just immovable RVs that can barely creep around and get around. So, you know, if an RV has to move every night, I'm not sure it's necessarily going to solve a little bit of that problem, which is a lot of these vehicles are just barely movable. So maybe some consideration for that for those less than mobile vehicles, if you will.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Anything else on safe parking?
I just want to add that not just RVs. I foresee if we just do a overnight parking anywhere in any lot, I foresee volunteers out there with bruised knuckles in a very cold morning, jump starting cars. I think it's probably what's in store for that. So.
Okay, our next item is year-round sheltering for families, and this is something that Emily O'Connor brought up last time. So we obviously dumped it on her to kick us off this morning. So Emily, I'd love it for you to take the conversation and lead it, if you would.
Well, I can do my best, and I appreciate you putting some time on the agenda. I guess with a short period of time to discuss, what I would love to do is sort of just kind of orient the group to what we generally do around emergency housing for families with children, and then see what additional discussion points or brainstorming efforts we'd like to kind of put in reserve potentially for a next meeting. We have right now, and I can't remember what it was, 81 or 89 families on the waiting list, but somewhere in that 80 to 90 range. And what we're seeing is that number creep back up, not significantly yet, because of course we have, you know, eviction moratorium that is helping kind of stave off some of that. But we anticipate that number will continue to climb for families with children. And we had worked really hard as a community to get that number down in recent years, and it's just been creeping back up. So we had it down into the teens, and we were having discussions about sort of what's going to happen when we get down to what we call functional zero. And that was really great. And what we've seen the past couple of years is just that slow, steady increase. And of course, now we've got COVID piling on top of that. So it would be really great if we could kind of get ahead of that and think about, as we go into this upcoming cold season, and also just strategically for the long term, how it is that we want to house families with children who experience homelessness. I will say that there is oftentimes parents will put their children somewhere, and then they themselves will be unsheltered in a car or a tent. And so what we end up with is a lot of family separation. We count on that, honestly, as a system to reduce the number of families that we need to put into motel stays, which is how we respond with an unsheltered family that has children in it. So there's also a lot of family separation that happens. And parents do the best they can to leave their kids in safe places, but they don't always have great choices of where to leave them. And we hear the stories of the impact of that. And if you can imagine the impact, the emotional toll on children who not only are experiencing homelessness, but then have to experience family separation on top of that, the toll that takes. And it takes us a long time to house folks because we don't have enough housing. So the other factors that are compounding this issue at the moment is that our programs are virtually frozen. I think we just had a meeting, well, maybe that was yesterday. They all blur together. But there's almost no movement in our program openings because there's nowhere for people to move out of our programs into, right? So everything kind of gets frozen, which helps them then start to stack up that waiting list even more. And when we have like our federal voucher program with the housing authority is locked up, so people who are ready to move into slightly more independent housing can't do that. So that it ends up being like this force from all sides that's pushing that increase up. So that's just to kind of anchor and orient us to what that looks like for families with children. Turning our attention to the emergency shelter response, what we utilize is emergency motel stays. That is our go-to system. We don't have an emergency shelter for families with children. We have a number of facilities that can be a little bit more flexible in terms of entrance, but we don't actually have emergency shelters with the exception of the placements that Interfaith is able to do through Family Promise. So I think it's maybe a capacity of 5 at a time. Communal living, very limited in terms of they have to be very careful about who they take in such that that communal environment is maintained. And we heard from Bridget Reeves last time that they had a couple families who've come through the base camp and her saying that, that's just really not an ideal space for children to be. So what we utilize is emergency motel stays. We had at sort of the early springtime of this pandemic up to about 65 families at a time in emergency motel stays. And that is, and like the price tag on that is significant. So if we were to, at one point we worked with the city and with Samia to put together kind of a budget of what it would look like if we actually addressed the waiting list that we have for families with children. And just for 11 families at a time throughout the year in a motel stay, we'd need about $300,000. We spend, the last time we tracked this, which was pre-COVID, the last time we pulled the data, I think it was 2018 that we pulled the data for. And we had spent as a community around $300,000 on emergency motel stays for families with children. That is got to be significantly higher in the last 2 years. I will bring that data maybe for the next meeting if I can get our community partners to be able to put some time and effort to that too. It is a significant amount of money we're spending on motel stays. And I want to say 2 things about that. One, the emergency motel stays are critical. We need them as a resource. It allows us to take a family today who shows up, who's in a car, and put them in a safe space. It's an important resource. But I also want to say that we tend to then just check it off the list. We're like, okay, well, families with kids, we're going to stick them in motels. And where we used to put them, in large part was Motel 6. And that is not, I would challenge any of you who've had any, I have 3 kiddos of my own, and there is no way that is a great environment for children to spend any length of time, let alone families that are coming in crisis, needing a lot of support, oftentimes with children who have special healthcare needs and other needs that they need to have met. So I want to recognize that the motel fix it's an important piece of our puzzle, but it really is worth us thinking about as a community, what is our value around children? And as children are experiencing homelessness, what's the standard that we want to set to try and make sure that we aren't fueling trauma while we provide responses? Right now, we have families that sometimes are in a motel stay up to 5 months. And that's because housing is so crunched. And I cannot imagine trying to have my 3 children in a motel room for 5 months, right? And these aren't places with playgrounds outside, and like these are not spaces that are designed to house families with children long term. It oftentimes is really challenging. Also, there's no kitchen, right? Try cooking for your kids with just a microwave for months, for weeks, whatever that is, right? And there's no place for them to be. It's hard for them to clean up. It's hard to like warm up a bottle and wash things. And I mean, if you just think about the impact of daily living for these families and these kids, this is a really low bar that we have said is acceptable. And it would be one thing if families never stayed in the motel system for more than like a few weeks. We might say like, okay, this is working for us as a community. It's not ideal, but we're able to do it really quickly. And so we feel like we're mitigating kind of the experience, the negative impact of the experience. But that's not what's happening currently. What's happening is families are having to stay in this system for a really long time. And we don't even have enough of that, such that families need to be separated during their experience of homelessness, because we never have enough money to motel all of the families. So we get to a point in the season where we stop housing them and we say, we actually don't have any more money. So now you're in your car with your kids. So I think this is something that we just don't talk about a lot. And I would love it if we could all talk about it and at least acknowledge like, what is the value perspective that we bring to this? And what are we actually willing to say is okay with us as a community? Let's own it. Let's be honest about it, because it is what's happening and it is not good. It's really not good. And I, there's no great, well, there is actually, there's some things that we could do that would be really awesome. But it would take us actually deciding that we want to change the status quo around how we treat children who are experiencing homelessness with their families. I would love to have robust conversations about that, and as a community make some decisions about whether spending $300,000, $400,000 a year on motel stays that we know are really challenging for kids, if there's a better use of that money, if we could somehow put some capital investment up front. What I would love to see is us build a facility that is like SRO style housing, basically, one really good step up from a motel room, but something very small that can be used as temporary housing, but is actually built in a way that isn't going to traumatize children, that has real kitchen facilities and a playground and outdoor space, where supportive services can come in and be delivered. And if down the road we don't need it for that purpose, would be easily converted to other housing uses, but that we could feel good about where we're putting children while they're experiencing whatever amount of homelessness we can't figure out how to fix faster. Of course, that's an expensive endeavor. It's a facility, but we also got to ask ourselves, like, what are we actually okay with as a community? And oftentimes what we do feels like really actually not okay. The kids, they aren't here to advocate for themselves. They can't tell you how horrible the situation is for them when they're staying in a motel for 2, 3, 4 months at a time with their family. But the trauma they will feel, right? They will feel that trauma, and we collectively will feel the trauma of these children well into the future. So I will get off my soapbox, but that's my brief orientation to the issue.
Well, thanks, Emily. That I really appreciate that. Michael?
Okay, thank you. So Emily, for $3.5 million, we can buy a 16-unit apartment building over in the Alderwood School District area, Alderwood Elementary. It's for sale right now. It doesn't look great, but it's, whatever. It's a little over $200,000 per unit, which I think is less than the Opportunity Council's, new dedicated.
Yeah, that's cheap.
Facility. Yeah, I mean, is that a reasonable thing? So we just basically go and buy an apartment building?
Yes, we should go and buy apartment buildings, and then we should do housing with them. Probably those apartment buildings are already housing people who are low income, so we have to think about that. But that doesn't mean that buying something that's maybe not great housing stock and investing and making it good housing stock and then making it permanently affordable with services, that's great. But that's going to be permanent supportive housing for families with children. And what I'm talking about is something different. So yes, we should do that. Absolutely. And what I'm talking about is filling a different need, which is not full apartments, but something that can be utilized differently for folks because we also have families who they don't necessarily know exactly where they're going to go at the onset of experiencing homelessness. They're not sure what the best arrangement is. Maybe they've had some sort of like family breakup and they're not sure whether they're going to relocate. They're not sure what the household composition is going to be. Maybe they're working on getting some of their kids back. Maybe they're working on like new sobriety and not sure how that's going to land. Not everybody is ready for a 1-year lease in an apartment. And
Well,
we need to be able to have options for them that is safe and not traumatic and supportive while they figure that out. That's like low barrier entrance that helps flesh out that entire continuum of housing. So I absolutely think we should do that. Great, let's like snap up that opportunity, but it doesn't fill the need that I'm talking about.
Well, I think you've created a kind of conundrum here. If I find a building that's nice enough to be really, genuinely conducive and healthy emergency transitional housing, you're going to look at that and say, man, we should make that permanently supportive instead. we should really, so it's not the same facility, they're different.
Yeah, so I'm talking about like SROs. So think about a motel room, but that actually has better equipment and is designed for kids. So not a 2 or a 3 bedroom unit that you give to one family, but something much smaller, but that is actually intentionally designed to house families longer, not permanently, but longer than we would want them in a Motel 6 motel room or whatever it is, right? But that isn't actually a full apartment. Here you're on your own with a lease. If I'm making sense.
Marcus.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that, Emily. I'm really glad you're on the work group. Honestly, you're always so well spoken, and you flesh this out really well. And when you talk about exacerbating the trauma, with our system that actually makes it just projects it on further and further, and of course the expensive hotels, it really makes it rather a no-brainer. Of course, HomesNOW has been trying to. That's one of our goals, is to get a family camp together too, where you would have a fenced-in area, common courtyard, and families contributing together. And that seems doable. With services building, playground, all that stuff. Probably substantially cheaper than $200K a unit. But anyway, I just want to applaud that and say that. And I also want to mention that exacerbating the situation is one of the issues that I'm dealing with, also with the sweeps, the cleanups, as Chief Dahl would like me to refer to them as. And I'm still awaiting policy on that, and I'm still awaiting any civic leader to speak to this publicly, please. So I don't want to steal your thunder there, Emily, because I am agreeing with you.
Please don't co-opt this space, which is about
not at all. No. I want to have this. I absolutely do. You're doing a great job. But it's the same thing too. When you move people around, it exacerbates their trauma.
I hear you.
We're actually in an emergency. So all of that, I agree with everything she's saying.
So I guess yes, thank you so much, Emily. I guess my question would be to the group: what do we think are some logical next steps so we can take some action on this? I guess I'll turn to the health department first and just get your thoughts, your initial thoughts anyway.
So with Ann and I, so obviously we've had these discussions for many years, and have certainly worked with Emily and her colleagues in the county on what can we do with the resources we have. Interestingly, there was some additional money set aside by Commerce to address this population. And I don't remember exactly the amount, but it's certainly less than $300,000 a year. It's minuscule relative to the need. So obviously, when we're looking at responding to homelessness, we're always looking at permanent solutions, knowing that sheltering and safe places to stay while you're waiting for permanent housing are still important. But really, our goal is always permanent housing. And Whatcom County has been particularly challenged in the sense that our cost of living in terms of rent and even mortgages is near the very top of the state relative to income that people can generate through salaries. So I don't have any immediate solutions other than I think, to be honest with you, it certainly is bigger than Whatcom County alone, this issue. And I believe maybe advocacy at a state level to change some of their requirements for how we spend the money we do get. For a long time, they were focusing it on individuals who have been homeless for a number of years. Obviously, that's a very important population to assist, but it did limit our ability to provide some of these funds to support families with children. The other thing I would say, other than maybe advocating with the state about what the issue is and what is needed to address it, is that there's another whole effort within the community focused on improving the health and well-being of families with children. And certainly the county health board voted to support a child and family action plan looking at much broader issues than just housing, but obviously housing is a critical foundation for health and wellness. And I think it's also important for us to partner with them and maybe bring somebody from that group to one of our future meetings to talk about some of their goals and objectives and what their action plan actually is, so that we can align to the best way forward on making sure that we don't duplicate efforts, but collaborate and build upon each other's efforts.
Have we researched, are there other programs in the state or nationally that address this specific issue? Do we know of any programs that have been successful?
I can ask Ann if she knows. There are a number of efforts throughout the country. You know, I think Family Promise is a great example, for instance, of one way. It doesn't serve a lot of people at any given time, but that's one effort. We know that we have a shelter provider here in our community who supports families with children, and we obviously financially support that. But I don't know. What we do know when we do the research in this regard is that when one population is hyper-focused upon, others suffer. And so it really, we have to take all of that, you know, in the context of the bigger picture to make sure the balance is appropriate. Obviously, we know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and focusing on families with young children is obviously in the best interest of not only those families and the children, but our entire community. So, you know, making sure that we prioritize them to the extent we have the resources is really critical.
Jen Daly.
I just want to share really quickly, you know, often, almost every day, someone asks me what leads to a young person being homeless. And I often say, like, I can't, there's never one thing. It's everyone has their own unique story and situation. But overarchingly, it gets back to childhood trauma. And it gets back to learned behaviors from your childhood, or normalizing things about, it's not always, it's never one thing, right? It's a situational, it's a learned behavior. And I think this is really prevention. What Emily's asking for is the idea of taking some of the trauma out of homelessness really could be the trajectory to shift the work that we're doing at Northwest Youth Services, which is a bunch of young kids that are perpetuating what they've learned throughout their childhood and what's been taught to them. Or, you know, anyway, so I do think that this is a solution that will impact, it will be a long trajectory, but it will impact our community in a really positive way if we could stop some of the trauma that's associated with childhood homelessness.
Michael.
In answer to your question, unless someone else has already done this, do we know of model programs regionally or nationally? I do have some time between now and the next meeting. I'd be glad to research preferably regional things, just so that there's at least some things on paper. And it is my background, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes if you're already working on that.
Toes avoided as far as I'm concerned.
I just see thumbs.
And that's a great segue, Michael, because the next thing I wanted to talk about was what our immediate next steps are going to be. I'd like to take this up in greater detail and with a little more time in 2 weeks. And maybe some of the work Michael's doing, researching, could be part of that. But Emily, maybe we could get a deeper dive into what we think are some of the solutions. I think that would be awesome. We could spend maybe 20, 30 minutes on it next time and really make that the focus of our meeting.
And Emily, would you be okay if I called you early next week to kind of figure out how that dovetails?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hey, Barry, Michael, I'd be willing to help you with that. Anything you need there. And Emily, I don't know if you want to break off into a smaller group there and focus on families there.
That sounds great. Maybe the three of you can coordinate, and Lisa?
I'd be happy to help also, because I could reach out to City of Seattle and some of the organizations I've worked with there too, if you're interested.
Maybe we can find a time to meet, or meet next Friday around this time.
Kathy, what's our quorum issue as far as public meeting?
12 members is a quorum.
Well, okay, so we're fine then. Okay, great. Well, let's take that up next time and really have a deeper dive. We have just a few minutes left, and I did want to bring up the our winter sheltering, both the temporary and our severe weather, and just find out if there's any updates at all on that.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. I've had some conversations with Bridget at the Lighthouse Mission. The health department has got the focus of public health, which is why we had the standards kind of set by the group last year. I think it was last year now, for those thresholds that need to be met in order for shelters to open. And I've talked with Bridget about that a little bit. And she has actually reached out to collaborate with CTK, which was one of our severe weather shelter partners last year. And CTK is asked to be a part of it again. And what they are doing is partnering with the Lighthouse Mission by using their old drop-in center space that's currently unoccupied. And what they would like to do is CTK would like to be the operational folks to open that shelter up when those severe weather thresholds are met. And then they also have talked about kind of keeping an eye on numbers, that even if there isn't a certain temperature threshold, but the numbers are climbing, and they would be opening up the shelter space as well. And I think with COVID precautions in place, I think Bridget said that's about 35 beds that could go in there with the COVID precautions in place. And so with the Lighthouse, with the base camp space of 200, and then the additional 35, that would bring the beds up to 235. And I'm still interested in speaking with other partners who are interested in doing severe weather shelter work, who might want to open up. I don't know that they have the population established yet that they would be serving in that space. Previously, CTK served men, single men, and they found that to be something that they would be happy to do again, but I don't know if they've finalized that. So that's where that piece is, and I'm still working with partners to try to see if anyone, there's one other church that they haven't quite established whether or not they would be interested. And then if this group or other folks have ideas of non-faith-based organizations that you want to direct me to, I'm happy to reach out to them and talk to them about what that looks like as well. I just haven't had a lot of breakthroughs as far as that goes, but that's kind of where we're at with that.
Well, thanks, Ann. Sounds like we have made some progress since the last time we talked about it. That's great to hear. Anything else on winter sheltering, either severe or the temporary? Yeah, was that your hand, Jen, or were you just?
I was going to share that the city of Bellingham has informed us that there isn't money available for temporary shelter. So at this point, Northwest Youth Services won't be having a winter shelter for young people. And we'd like to figure out a way to have some sort of shelter. And so it's a conversation that we'd like to be involved with, and we see the need.
Yes, I would love to talk to you about that specifically, please. Okay, any other items that just quickly that we want to talk before we go into public comment? Marcus?
Yeah, I'd like to, I'm taking this space, but I really want to offer the space again to any civic leader who would like to speak to the cleanups issue going on with BPD. I don't, or if anybody from, if maybe David Crass has any news, we've been expecting documents, asking for documents. Hannah Stone asked for documents from the BPD on July 24th. We're talking about 4 pieces of paper. They still have not showed up. Anybody? Seth?
I'll talk about that. We've been corresponding back and forth with Councilmember Stone. She has a document. She's made edits. We're meeting with her probably Tuesday to go over that and finalize it. We've also gathering information for a public disclosure request on the same topic. It's all in the works. It's been back and forth. She's aware of it. She's seen the document, and like I said, it's in a draft mode now. We're finalizing it next week. Should be ready to go.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. As so far the only public person who's been dealing with this, I would appreciate being in the loop with any information as it comes down. I haven't had a reply from Hannah since I last heard from her on August 27th. Seth, I see that maybe you're here. Can you offer any shed any light? The last time we spoke on September 1st, we were talking about the veracity of my statements in this 7-page letter, and I'm wondering if you've made any headway.
Looks like Seth is frozen to me.
Okay. Well, anyway, and again,
Michael Lilliquist.
I'm not going to address this question in detail here. I'll just let you know that I certainly have been in communication with the mayor, with Hannah, with the police chief. As I've indicated all along, my concern is that not only we have the right policy, but we're following our policy. And so I'm going to leave my comments there. That's been my focus. That's my effort.
Okay, I've just got to say that I've heard the policy preached to me from all sides, from counselors telling me what Dave Dahl's policy is. That's fine, except the policy is definitely not being followed, and I stand 100% by the veracity of the letter that I submitted to the work group, and I would testify to every bit of it in court.
Seth, it looks like you're unfrozen now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard me or not. Suddenly, everything went screen for the last. Everything went blank for the last minute.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Well, I'll repeat myself if I wasn't heard at all. The last thing I heard, Marcus, was you asking if I had anything to add to what David Crass had mentioned. And my understanding is that we're compiling data, and I'm hopeful that we can provide an update on that at our next homeless strategies work group meeting in 2 weeks, if not before. But certainly we'll report on that at our next meeting.
I appreciate that, and I hope we can all speed it along faster. I remind you all, we're in a pandemic emergency, and as far as I've been aware, we're still operating in the absence of any policy on camp cleanups. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks all for that. Let's go ahead and move into public comment. Kathy, is there anyone with their hand raised?
Yes, the first speaker is Doug Gustafson. Doug, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Hey, you guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Welcome, Doug.
Hey, thanks. Hey, this is Doug, chairman of HomesNOW, not later. I would like to propose that HomesNOW use the former Safe Haven location in the Whatcom 911 dispatch center parking lot. Assuming that there's no emergency encampments available before winter sets in, we are proposing we could have access to the site in January or February, which would give us some time to construct around 15 tiny homes as the weather improves and avoiding tents altogether. I would like to know if there's any problem with using the former Safe Haven site or if that location has been slated for another purpose or not. It already has all the hookups we need, and the Sunnyland neighborhood liked us when we were hosted there last time as a tent encampment. So we've already done it before in that location. We do not require any direct government funding, and the construction of the new tiny homes would be a community project for our volunteers and the general public. We already have companies and organizations which have offered to build a number of the structures for free, including Habitat for Humanity. We're ready to go, and I'd like to hear from the Mayor Fleetwood about whether this is a viable option or not. In the past, it's been our experience that the city has let us know ahead of time whether turning in a proposal for a specific site was viable or not, since they are more aware of the use of the land required. Also, we are open to other sites as well, such as the former Clean Green site, formerly slated to move Unity Village to, but we can build a second village there, and also has a lot of land for parking as well if we wanted to do a combined program as what was discussed during the meeting. If the mayor and the city is in support of that or something like that, we'd be happy to get started, and we have the paperwork ready to go as soon as you guys are ready. Perhaps there's an even better location than these two as well. Currently, we're a little late for being able to set up a tent encampment for winter. If, however, there's a way to get around this process more quickly and we had access to the fabricated structures that Marcus was talking about, then we can also do that as well. Assuming that won't happen, we will be ready to move anyway. I invite any of the members of the work group to come down and visit Unity Village, if you have not done so already, to see how well the model works and how quickly it can be replicated and brought online. This isn't about funding, it's about action. Please get back to us about whether this is viable or not. We know the permitting process takes a few months, and we're eager to get started as soon as we can to house more people. We've proven our model works, and it's very inexpensive to implement. All we need is the spot to build it on and use. We don't need much to make fast progress. We're only one organization of many, and we're all helping different segments of people. I just want us to run out of segments. Please consider it and get back to us. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. Anyone else with their hand raised? Kathy?
Yes, the next speaker is Audrey. Audrey, I've unmuted you and you're welcome to talk. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome, Audrey. We're not getting any audio from Audrey. Looks like she's unmuted as far as my screen. We'll come back to Audrey. Who's the next speaker?
The next speaker is Crystal.
Crystal.
Hi there, thank you. I just have a quick question based on what David Cross just said. He seemed to imply that a policy is newly being drafted and reviewed by Hannah Stone. So I'm curious what procedure Bellingham Police is following now. And I'd like clarification on his statement. Does that mean that there's been no policy in effect since the pandemic to follow CDC and county health recommendations to leave unsheltered homeless in place and only address human health situations in this emergency? I'm trying to understand, has there been no change in that policy? Is this a newly drafted procedure and it's not yet being followed by police?
I'll explain to you. There is no policy specific. It's a procedure, just like how we handle various situations. It's pretty in depth. There were changes made due to COVID. It's kind of the totality of the impact and hazards at a site. That was the criteria. When stuff was deemed unsafe, we were getting notices from several agencies around the city that certain sites were creating hazards like fire, like health hazards, things like that. So there's no exact science to it. It's the procedures that were given to Councilmember Stone. There is no policy. It's like I said, it's a procedural document.
Okay, yeah, then just for clarification, then I used the wrong word. Is there no specific procedure in place right now? Is that newly being drafted?
No, nothing's changed. The criteria was, I guess, more restrictive when we came back after the 6 weeks pause. It's the camps are prioritized, and so camps are still on the list that were there previously, but the ones that are being addressed are the ones that created the greatest impact. It's a long process. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it if you want to give me a call. Again, we should have our document that went to Councilmember Stone completed and out of drafts form next week for sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I don't want to take up everyone's time. It gets very detailed.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker.
Actually, could you please state your full name for the record?
Yeah, sure. That's Crystal Rodriguez.
Okay, who's our next speaker?
Thank you. Next is Mary Mcintosh.
Mary, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mary Mcintosh, and I'd actually like to speak to what was just said. With the camp cleanups, it appears now if the policy or the procedure is just being drafted now, that Crystal's absolutely correct. There was nothing in place up until this current time, which means for all of these months, these 6 months, that COVID has been in an emergency status here in our county and city and the entire world. We've had no policy or procedure in place to deal with the homeless people. Also, I understand that Claudia Viscara, the police officer that is deemed responsible for tagging the camps that are to be cleaned up, is working remotely. And so I'm curious as to who is the person or who is the entity that is tagging these sites that are being cleaned up. Who's making this decision without a health professional available to decide if a camp is healthy or if it is something that needs to be cleaned up for health reasons. Is there anybody who's able to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. No, there's always been procedures in place. They became more restrictive of which camps were prioritized to be scheduled for cleanup. So we had to look at the impacts and the hazards, things like that. There's a misconception that it's just a health hazard. There's many hazards that are involved with that. Claudia Viscara is not a police officer. She's a civilian. She's an encampment cleanup coordinator. She does direct folks, and she's in charge of scheduling and determining which camps are tagged. They're done by the officers on the days of the cleanup. Marcus is familiar with how that goes. He's seen it. And she goes out and decides what's tagged and how that goes. She gets an assessment kind of through HOT. HOT doesn't determine what gets cleaned up. They just verify, is there a camp there? Does it look big? Does it look small? And they communicate through that.
So it sounds like the HOT team is the one that makes the decision.
No, not at all. It's Claudia Viscara.
Claudia Viscara makes that decision depending on what the HOT team says.
Nope. In conjunction with the infra. They kind of verify, yeah, we saw a camp here. Is it big? Is it small? What is the impacts there? She goes to the sites. She goes out there and then we made some changes. We saw we could do things better. She's there more frequently than she was, but yeah, she's the one that makes sole determination of what is scheduled.
Oh, so she's not working remotely at this time. She is actually going to the camps.
She's been out on and off. She works remotely a lot of the times, but she comes into the office several times a week, just depending on the nature of if there's work available that she has to physically be here for.
I guess I was just asking if she's actually physically going to the camps or not.
Yes, she is.
Okay, that's good. All right, thank you.
Okay, Marcus, I want to get through the public first before we turn it back to any of the members.
I'm just curious about some clarifications on it, though.
We'll get back to you.
Okay.
Anyone else with their hands raised?
Yes, we'll go back to Audrey. Audrey, if you'd like to speak, and if any other members in attendance, any other members of the public in attendance would like to speak, you can raise your hand by clicking the hand icon or dialing *9 on your phone. Audrey, are you there? I'll go to our Next speaker, Sherry Lapoff.
Sherry,
Sherry?
go ahead. I show you still as muted, Sherry, so you might want to click the unmute button, please.
I've asked her to unmute. Sherry or Audrey, if you could, either of you could speak and see if your audio is working, if you'd like to speak during the public comment. Any other members, if you'd like to speak, please click the hand icon. There are no other members with their hands raised.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. We will close the public comment section and I will call on Marcus.
Hi, I don't mean to take up too much of this, although this is an emergency and this has been going on all summer. Thank you, Dave Crass, for explaining some of that. I need a little clarification if you don't mind. When did Claudia start going out in the field this summer?
She's been going out at different times with the kit crews. Sometimes she goes to the briefing, sometimes not. She comes in to impound evidence if it's needed. She's come back and forth. Most of our division is working remotely when they need to, just to limit contacts. She's been going to the camps for the last couple weeks prior, the day of the cleanup. She's been going to the camps with officers ahead of the cleanups.
And when did that start?
Probably 3 weeks ago.
So up until 3 weeks ago, we've been operating without Claudia.
No, she goes out,
present.
but we're having her go out more frequently. And that was based off your information, that it wasn't probably as frequent as it should be.
There was, to be clear,
Do you hear any of that?
do I hear? I'm hearing okay. Okay, anyway, I just to be clear, you were in the meeting with me too, Dave. And I think we've got Sherry unmuted or Audrey, one of those two right now. You were in the meeting where Claudia said she had not been going out at all during the COVID crisis to any of the camps. And it was somebody else who was telling her all of the information about the camps, and she would write the orders to the officers. Now, I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. And so up to 3 weeks ago, that was the status, is what I think I'm gathering.
She wasn't going out as frequently. I don't know that, but she comes and goes. She was going out and addressing the camps. We did direct her to go on the days of the cleanup. So there was a closer proximity to verify the activities of the camp. And that was strictly based off the conversations I had with you. I said, why don't we start doing that?
Great.
Prior to that, she was going infrequently. She was going, but it wasn't all the time.
Okay, well, I thank you for clarifying. And I welcome anybody. I'm trying to keep this an open dialogue. I've been asking for leadership from the beginning. I don't want to feel like I'm dragging everybody through this. So if you have information that you can share with me that says we've made some progress somewhere, boy, do I want to hear about it. That goes to the civic leaders, that goes to the police department. I want to be seen as a partner. I'm a sheltering agent, but I also happen to be homeless advocate in this work group, and I have to do that. And that's so I appreciate all your time with this. And if you see me beating my head against the wall with passion, it's because I've been the only one talking about it. I thank the speakers who spoke today. And so I think there's more work to be done. I appreciate being cut into the loop. I thought I was told by Hannah that Leighton was going to be in charge of getting the paperwork finally dealt with. And so now it is you, correct, Dave?
It's Leighton, Vescara, and myself.
Okay. Okay, well, I look forward to hopefully hearing from all of you soon on this, just so we can bring it to a speedy resolution. We're in an emergency. Let's come up with solutions as well, not just policy. Thanks.
Okay, we did have one item that needed some discussion. That was our meeting time. It had been proposed, I believe, in an email that we moved the meeting time from 10:30 to 1 p.m. So I kind of wanted to get some feedback on that before we implement it. Anybody have any thoughts? Or is there any big problems with that?
Is that on Friday still, Barry?
Yes, it would be the same bi-weekly schedule, but rather than at 10:30, it'd be at 1.
Be easier for me.
I currently have unified command meetings at 1 on Fridays. They don't always take a whole lot of time, but that's a set time that I have on Fridays.
Would say a 1:30 work better?
Yeah, I could probably go and check in for half an hour at the other meeting and then come over to this one.
I want to be able to accommodate everybody as we can, but yet still have a good, effective meeting. So any other thoughts? Does 1:30 work for folks?
Pushing this to the afternoon does not work well for me with my children schedule. I'll try and be as flexible as possible, but I wasn't anticipating a shift of this from morning to afternoons. It's a little harder if we're also doing it every other week. So I will try and go where the boat goes, but that makes it hard for me.
And we have a staffing issue in the morning, so I don't know that we can work around that.
Are we talking about, I'm sorry, are we talking about the 18th or the 25th starting this?
2 weeks from today.
Okay. So it's the 25th. Okay, that's good.
Yes, the 25th. Okay, why don't we just go ahead and give that a whirl and see if it works for everyone. So anything else for the good of the order?
Hey, Barry, I see those Audrey and Sherry have trying to raise their hands again. I don't know if I want to give it a try or not.
We just have a few minutes left, but let's give them a try, I guess. Let's start with Audrey. Can you unmute and speak?
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay. I'm so sorry. I normally do Zoom on my phone, but I was trying on my laptop and it wasn't working. I'll try to make this as fast as I can. Couple different points. Michael, I don't know how to say your last name. Barres?
Barris.
Okay. Thank you. There's community action in Tempe, Arizona. I volunteered for them. They actually buy motels that are sort of dilapidated and they make kitchens in them, make communal kitchens outside, play areas for kids, exactly like Emily talked about. There's one in Mesa, Arizona called La Mesita. Fantastic program, because one thing Emily didn't mention is communal living. They don't allow boys. That drives women to the woods. And then because if they have boys, they can't sometimes go to DV shelters with their sons. That drives them to the woods. And at this time, if they're in the woods, you know, they're getting pushed around. And a lot of times women want to feel safe. And that's why they go to the woods and hide, because they can't be found. So if you want to check that out, Arizona has a great program where they buy up motels for those specific temporary shelters that are less traumatizing. Parking. The OC, the Opportunity Council, has a parking lot that's empty from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. The only people that park there are people that live in high rent buildings that don't want to pay for their own parking. So they park there, light it up. They already paid thousands of dollars a month for security to go in and out, provide a porta potty, make it parking overnight, maybe just for women and children. Make sure they have to be cleaned out by 7 a.m. Just something to think about. Let's see here. The other thing that Ann Deacon said is so important, so important. Hyper focus on long-term homeless, chronically homeless people doesn't always work. Providing housing for people who are severely mentally ill or drug addicted for decades, that provides a safe place for them to kill themselves or to overdose. Sometimes that's not an incentive. If you're giving someone housing that is not clean, doesn't mean they're going to get clean. Sometimes it creates an environment where people that are trying to get clean don't want to go to. So I think with the funding we have, she's right. Sometimes we have to think outside the box. What about the space behind the OC? If Doug wants to look at that, there's a huge strip of land next to a warehouse where there's a fence. I imagine something like a fair tent. See if someone can even donate it. I'm sure there are hundreds of thousands of dollars probably, because they're huge, but that tent can be heated. Tent campers can be inside. The OC's right behind it.
30 seconds, please.
Yeah, so that's the only other thing. I do want to speak to the sweeps. I'm totally against it too. It's destroying people's property. I saw something about emotional. Someone's kids' photos being destroyed, the only photos they owned. It's wrong, especially in COVID. They should have places to park or to camp safely to stay away from others during COVID. And register with the city. Get a garbage can and a porta potty instead of paying some of the highest paid cops in the state to go out and police them. Make them report their whereabouts.
Time.
Thank you so much for waiting and being patient. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Audrey.
it.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thanks.
Sherry, are you able to unmute?
Audrey, could you state your name for the record, your full name for the record, please?
Sure, Audrey Douglas, and I want to say I worked for the Opportunity Council for almost 9 years as an information and referral specialist. So I have talked to almost everybody in this county and experienced every type of experience that's out there. So I do know a little bit about it.
Thanks, Audrey. Sherry, are you able to address us?
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm Sherry Leibhoff, and I have been, I volunteer with HomesNOW, and I've been following these meetings for more than a year now. I ended up with a long list of things I wanted to mention, and most things have certainly been reiterated by other people, and I'm very supportive of that. One thing is that I'm very happy to hear there may have been some movement on the cleanups issue that I presume has prompted discussion, and certainly hopefully some decisions about how to go forward with that in a way that's also fair to the homeless people that are subjects of this. The other thing I really wanted to say is that I hope before it seemed to be interest expressed, as well as I'm watching everybody's faces, in interest in the pallets, and the pallet very appropriate way to address our problems. I mean, they're mostly a time-sensitive issue is what's at this point. It's going to be the middle of October now in a month, and it's time for us to get this money and look at the pallets. I hope between now and the next meeting, somebody, hopefully a small group of people or everybody or somebody, can attend a tour and go to the property where they're building the pallets, and just see if that is something that we should look closer at. And I'm sure Marcus or somebody can, probably anybody can set this up with the people there and can get up there hopefully within the next 2 weeks. So we have something to talk about. This looks like a very viable solution, but maybe not solution, but a viable way to address the terrible problems that are about to slam onto all of us with the increase in homelessness and the winter forging ahead. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sherry. And thanks to everybody for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and have a great weekend. We are adjourned.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank
The
you.
recording has stopped.